They eat the flesh of their worlds with silver cutlery. SIP age-old vintages while billions choke on chemfog and sign death warrants with the same ease they draft love letters. From marble-wrapped spires built atop mass graves, planetary governors and Warhammer 40K rule, not with honor, but with performance, and some too many abandon even that. Beneath the gilded aquila etched on every door lies a rot that seeps upward, not down. Their oaths to the Imperium are spoken in High Gothic, but their hearts, their dreams, and their secret rituals belong to something else. Something older than the Emperor, something that listens, not from orbit, but from within, on millions of worlds across the Imperium. The governors who once knelt to Terra now bow to chaos, not with fanfare or flame, but in whispered exchanges, in blood teeths, hidden in shipping logs, in inherited masks they dare not remove even in sleep. This isn't about fallen warlords or cultist uprisings. This is about the ones who never stopped pretending, the ones who still smile for imperial officials while their children are offered to demonic patrons in garden shrines no lex mechanic has ever seen. This is the hidden reality. This is the empire within the Imperium. If you serve the God Emperor in truth or curiosity, remain. Subscribe to the broadcast. Share it through secure volume. But if you hear your name whispered back through the silence, disconnect immediately. You're already seen. The chandeliers still swayed gently, as if someone had only moments ago walked beneath them. Their crystalline teeth refracted candlelight into soft spectrums that danced across silver cutlery and golden wine flutes. The hall, 3 stories tall and ribbed with fluted Gothic arches, was silent but not dead. The long dining tables stretched from end to end, like a sarcophagus lid left ajar. Every seat still pushed out at angles, suggesting recent use. The plates were full. The food, though congealed slightly at the edges, retained its warmth. The meat bled gently onto white porcelain, and beneath the scent of roasted fowl, caramelized roots, and spiced oils, there lingered something sour, not decay, not yet, but something out of place. Sweat, iron, the breath of something that hadn't been invited. Governor Soretta's seal still marked the menu card at the head of the table. Her name was elegantly embossed in red gold ink, beside the insignia of House Thalorian, her line, her title, her claim. The card bore no burn marks, no warp residue, no obvious signs of interference. It simply sat there, like everything else, undisturbed. 14 noble houses were meant to dine that night. Representatives from trade guilds, the ecclesiarchy, and the local Administratum branch had all signed attendance. Their names were checked off on the arrival scroll. Witnesses placed each of them inside the hall. And then, nothing. No servants reported the guests leaving. No door opened. No curtain moved. Security servitors placed along the exits recorded only static during the 2-hour window in which the disappearance occurred. Upon reboot, they resumed normal function and reported the room as nominal. That word would appear again, too many times. The first to discover the absence was not a soldier or a clerk. It was a musician part of the hired quartet, intended to play after the second course. He entered from the side alcove, where performers usually waited, viola in hand, and stopped mid. The room greeted him with warmth, with light, with silence. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of something that had just happened. He would later be sedated, after clawing his own ears, screaming that the silverware was whispering. None of the food tested bore toxins. None of the wines held hallucinogens. No traces of warp energy were recorded. No demonic residue, no known infectious vectors. The Mechanicus pronounced the scene historically intact. The local Arbites, less poetic, called it fucked clean. Every attempt to scan the area returned correct atmospheric balances, temperature gradients, energy readouts. The data was perfect, too perfect. Forensic teams found that even the dust under the chairs had settled in patterns too regular, too symmetrical as, if curated, not random. And then there was the clinking, not rhythmic, not continuous, intermittent, like a fork jostled by wind, but there was no wind. The hall had been sealed by command lock after the incident. Still, in the deepest part of the night cycle, guards stationed outside the blast doors swore they heard faint sounds, metal touching porcelain, glass shifting minutely against wood. One claimed he heard the unmistakable sound of a wine glass being raised and then set down gently. He never returned for his next shift. No note, no disturbance. Just his absence added to the growing list. The Inquisition was notified, but only at the tertiary level. A full-scale investigation would require planetary-wide escalation, and that would mean admitting the event happened. Governor Soretta's name remained in the directory, her orders still transmitted, her sigil still sealed, but her face, her voice, her presence had not been seen since the night of the feast. Holorecordings showed her at the table, smiling, raising a toast. The next frame, empty chair, full glass, no cut, no fade, just absence. Like light withdrawn from a mirror, attempts to enter the hall again were met with sudden environmental anomalies. Lights failed, specs units glitched. One tech priest claimed the oxygen density fluctuated in exact intervals, as if something were breathing in sync with them. Another swore the shadows did not align with the light sources but reversed themselves, crawling toward instead of away. Eventually, a decision was made to preserve the room, not cleanse it, not seal it, preserve it. A red velvet cordon was placed around the entrance. Signs of reverence appeared. Candles began to be left at the threshold, whispered prayers from cleaning staff. House DeLorean's lesser cousins began sending offerings, flowers, stones, fragments of bone. A new tradition was born. None remembered who started it. No one dared end it. The Imperium thrives on denial disguised as order. The High Administratum recorded the incident as a ritual disappearance, a term so vague it could mean anything and, therefore, meant nothing. The people called it the empty supper. Ballads followed. Children played a game where they dared each other to walk near the cordon. One child claimed she saw someone still sitting at the table, not a noble, not a guest, a figure draped in darkness, sipping slowly from an untouched glass. Watching the door, to this day, no one has claimed responsibility. No demonic cult confessed. No Xenos activity was detected. No civil unrest coincided. But the room remains untouched, undisturbed, and perfectly preserved. Visitors report a strange sense of hunger when standing before the doors, not for food, for presence, for something that was meant to arrive but never did. The feast was never served, but it was attended, and perhaps, somewhere in the warped inseams of that chamber, it still is. The clinking has never stopped. The ballroom of House Varelian gleamed like a promise made in polished bone. Marble veined with gold dust reflected candlelight from chandeliers older than the current planetary calendar. Music harps, vials, something choral and wordless drifted through the perfumed air like smoke refusing to dissipate. Every guest smiled. Every gown shimmered. Every glove, every brooch, every ribbon worn with precision born not of vanity, but necessity. This was not fashion. It was liturgy. To the outsider, it was decadence. To the faithful, it was alignment. Among the highborn of Segmentum Tempestus, allegiance to chaos was never screamed from pulpits or painted on skin in fresh blood. It was stitched into hell, carved into crystal, hidden in the posture of a bow just slightly too deep to be mere courtesy. In a world where direct devotion to the ruinous powers meant instant annihilation at the hands of the Ordo Hereticus, nobility learned the art of camouflage centuries ago. Their blasphemies were beautiful. Each noble family had its own dialect of worship. House Imran wore cloaks fastened by pins shaped like dying suns, abstract, innocuous, unless one had read the pre-imperial apocrypha on the fourfold solar collapse. House 3's wine glasses bore 9 etched ridges, always refilled after the 7th sip. A ritual, a contract. House Relatra performed their seasonal waltz backward, to honor entropy in motion. When asked, they claimed it was a family tradition in memoriam of an ancient dance master. Even the inquisitors stationed in System considered it quaint. This is how chaos thrives, not in open flame, but in slow infection. Not in riots, but in etiquette. Every planetary governor knows that their greatest shield is custom. Tradition is armor, and the older the ritual, the less it is questioned. The Administratum doesn't have the manpower to analyze every planetary variation of toast giving or garment fastenings, nor do they care. They're watching for weapons. Not Winks. One former diplomat before her mind collapsed in dream madness wrote in her journal that House Varelian's debutante ball included a moment where all music stopped, and every noble turned their backs to the windows for exactly 33 seconds. She claimed it was to let something look at them. When asked, the House Archivist denied the event. The musicians remembered only the applause, but her journal continued, describing a man without eyes who handed her a rose that bled through her gown. She was later found in the archives, attempting to rewrite the system's star charts by hand, scratching names into her own arms. Among the noble elite, true heresy is not declared. It is inherited, passed through bloodlines like eye color or taste for fine liquor. Children are raised not to worship chaos, but to emulate ancestors who did, unknowingly or not. They speak oaths in high Gothic phrases that translate, imperfectly, into invocations. We who rise beyond the flame, one family motto states. The Inquisition, under pressure to process billions of reports a year, flagged it as poetic metaphor, but those words appear verbatim in the first canticle of the Searing Maw, a prayer to the demon Prince Dultarach, whose domain is suffering born of ambition. The nobility understand one thing above all: control is theater. To survive under the Imperium's crushing boot, they must appear devout, composed, loyal, but behind closed doors, or worse, in plain sight, they perform gestures that once made entire sects burn. They do not call it chaos, they call it continuity, legacy, purity of blood. The same words the Imperium uses, just inverted. During the Festival of Renewal, nobles gather in silence at dusk. They wear masks shaped like ancestral faces. This is said to honor those who came before. In truth, it is to wear the self backward, to surrender identity and allow older names to inhabit them, if only briefly. No one speaks. The silence is the offering. The stillness is the prayer. And when the first breath breaks the hush, it is not always human. One planetary envoy once attended such a gathering by mistake. He believed it a masquerade. His last recorded words were a whisper. No one was breathing but me. When security found him, his body was intact, his mind shattered. He repeated one phrase endlessly, the eyes behind the velvet, until his jaw dislocated. This is the horror of nobility in the Imperium. They are not rebels. They are not cultists in sewers painting 8-pointed stars in blood. They are the Empire's polished face, its legacy, its pride, and behind that face, teeth, ritual teeth, smiling too wide. The highborn do not fear the Inquisition because they understand the Inquisition, often better than the Inquisitors understand themselves. They know what can be seen and what cannot be processed. They know that a heresy which looks too much like tradition ceases to be heresy at all. It becomes identity. So they waltz, they drink, they kneel when required, and rise only when unseen eyes allow. And somewhere between the clasp of a glove and the tilt of a glass, they offer prayers and movements too small to name. They do not need altars. They are the altars. He had once been a boy named Tavius, though no one living used that name anymore. Now he was Unit 7C, a menial servitor assigned to the lower archive halls of the Thalorian Palace. His skull bore the faint trace of a surgical seam, where memory cores had been installed and his speech centers excised. The augmetic lenses fitted over his eyes pulsed faintly with red light as they scanned columns of data slates, stacked higher than a chimera transport. He moved like all servitors, too slow, deliberate, precise. Yet sometimes, when the hum of the cogitators dimmed and the hall's air tasted of dust and oil, Tavius paused, a flicker of something behind the glassy red glow, a shudder of fingers, as if remembering a shape they had once loved to draw. Fragments of self, pressed like dried flowers between endless layers of duty. He was not meant to remember. Memory was inefficiency. Servitors were blank vessels, given just enough cognition to follow tasks. But whoever prepared Tavius had made an error, or perhaps a mercy. The deepest segment of his hippocampal implant remained untouched. A single crystalline shard of true recollection embedded like a splinter under scar tissue. It did not surface all at once. It came in pulses, a scent, a word glimpsed in a data slate header, the echo of a voice he no longer possessed. And with each pulse came images, a banquet table, a masked woman with eyes like molten gold, a child led away down a hall lined with statues, whose faces shifted when you weren't looking. The Thalorian dynasty had ruled this world for 23 generations. Its archives recorded victories, harvest quotas, imperial decrees, obeyed and surpassed. Yet, in the margins of those records, Tavius began to see patterns. Names recurring in odd intervals, trade agreements sealed in blood-colored ink, a procession described identically across centuries, even though the participants' names changed. And always, the same refrain in High Gothic: "We rise beyond the flame." He did not know why those words burned in his skull. He only knew they were his. The deeper his flashbacks reached, the more his body betrayed him. His augmetic lenses blurred at key phrases, forcing him to reboot. His limbs trembled when he carried data slates marked with the governor's private sigil. Other servitors shunned him, though they could not think enough to articulate fear. Janitors whispered about the one with the twitch, and left offerings of machine oil in his path, as if appeasing a spirit. He began to dream something servitors were not supposed to do. In the dreams, he walked the palace as a child again, barefoot on mosaic floors, depicting the imperial Aquila, with wings that curled inward like claws. He followed his mother into a garden where roses grew from human finger bones. He remembered her whispering the family prayer. Though her lips moved in shapes his adult mind now recognized as forbidden. In reality, the dynasty's fall had been glacial. No coup, no dramatic shift, no sudden altar erected to a demonic patron. Just gradual substitution. Old hymns replaced by new verses. Old seals updated to more symmetrical designs. Old portraits retouched so eyes stared a fraction wider. The changes were invisible to anyone not embedded for decades. Tavius had been embedded for a lifetime. Even with his mind torn apart, the residue clung like scent to cloth. He carried one command in his neural core that no tech priest had ever been able to overwrite. It was older than his servitor body, older than the surgical scars. It echoed through every task like a heartbeat. Do not forget the door. He did not know which door. There were thousands. But whenever his paths took him near the sealed vault beneath the east wing, his augmetics flickered and his pulse spiked. The other servitors would continue past. He would pause, staring at the brass panel, etched with nameless runes that predated the Imperium's arrival. He would feel without lungs to feel it, the breath of something waiting. The mute janitors and recycled scribes began to notice. They had no tongues, but they watched. One scribbled crude pictograms of a child and a door into the grime on a wall before a custodian scraped it clean. Another left a torn scrap of parchment under Tavius's workstation bearing a single word. Remember, the parchment disintegrated before he could hide it. Dust. Always dust. His flashbacks sharpened. He saw the governor's ancestors hosting dances in masks shaped like beasts. He saw a priest of the ecclesiarchy weeping as he blessed a shipment of grain that stank of charnel ash. He saw himself, his younger self, holding a data slate too heavy for his small arms, inscribed with the same runes that now adorned the vault door, and behind it, a voice not heard, but felt pressing into his skull like a cold hand. When you are nothing, you will remember everything. In the present, Tavius continued to shuffle data slates from shelf to shelf. His augmetic eyes recorded nothing unusual. His lips could not form words. Yet inside, something assembled itself, piece by piece. A mosaic of guilt and ritual, and bloodlines decaying into worship. He began to understand that the dynasty had not merely fallen into chaos. It had been built on it. That the mask of loyalty was never a mask at all, but a face grown over centuries. That the door beneath the east wing was not a vault, but a mouth. One day, while retrieving a record for a visiting adept, he passed the vault again. His servitor gait slowed. His fingers twitched. He pressed his palm to the brass panel. It was warm. The adept behind him asked what he was doing. He could not answer. Sparks leaped from his augmetics. A memory uncoiled fully for the first time. He saw himself as a child, kneeling before the governor, holding out a key carved from bone. Her voice, "When you wake again, bring me this door." Then darkness, surgery, oblivion. Now, in the quiet of the archive, Tavius withdrew his hand. He turned. He shuffled on. His lenses glowed red, blank again. But somewhere deep inside the machine shell, a name pulsed. Not his own, not the governor's. Something older, something waiting. And though no one could hear it, he whispered inside his silent skull, "I have not forgotten." When Varela 9 was first seated by imperial charter, the surveyor's charts listed a single moon, a mild sphere of chalk-white rock whose tides shaped the planet's vast barley seas. Its presence was unremarkable, its orbit precise. For 4 centuries, the Administratum's ledgers, the Mechanicus orbital maps, and the farmers' calendars agreed on Pallia alone. Then, in the 200th year of Governor Everin Thalorian's reign, a second satellite appeared in the records. Not in the sky, at least. No one admitted seeing it before, but in the data itself. Cogitator logs updated overnight. Star charts refreshed. An entire gravitational model rewritten without memo or meeting. The new moon had a name already, Nixos, and yet no clerk would admit to typing it. Astrocartographers dispatched from the Segmentum fleet found Nixos hanging above the southern hemisphere like a bruise, slightly smaller than Pallia, perfectly spherical. Its surface glimmered with mineral streaks resembling veins under translucent skin. Photographs were taken, auspex sweeps performed. No propulsion, no warp signature, no sign of construction. Geological cores returned, results older than the system's own star. Impossible in every measurable way. When pressed, the lead magos of the expedition said only, "We found what was always there." From the ground, farmers began reporting changes in their harvest cycles. Barley bent unnaturally at dusk, following an unseen tide. Livestock birthed twins with mirrored markings on their hides. At night, Nixos rose pale and silent above the horizon. Its light neither silver nor blue, but a muted gold like old parchment. Those who stared too long swore they saw shapes across its surface. Dark ridges and shallow craters forming patterns like sigils. When the first high-resolution imagery returned, those patterns resolved into something undeniable, a seal. The same twisting emblem used on the governor's private correspondence. A seal registered nowhere in the imperial heraldry databases, but present on every encrypted order leaving his palace. Governor Thalorian called it coincidence. The Administratum issued a bulletin declaring Nixos a pre-existing, but unrecorded natural satellite, blaming previous survey errors on data corruption and clerical oversight. Yet, no astropath could explain the psychic echo Nixos generated. Choirs stationed on the orbital relay reported hearing whispers, not in Gothic, but in library tongue, a rhythm of cataloging, as if someone were reciting entries from an endless index. Some vomited blood during transmission. Others went blind for hours. One young telepath screamed, "Stop filing me," before his brain hemorrhaged. The Inquisition sent a discreet observer under the guise of a grain inspector. He never made Planetary. His shuttle's instruments recorded 2 moons at launch and 1 at descent. His last vox to his handler contained only 3 words: "It is watching." His vessel drifted back into orbit empty. No sign of forced entry. No sign of exit beneath the governor's palace. Tavius, now long since reduced to a numbered servitor, handled the flood of new data slates arriving hourly. Nixos maps, Nixos readings, Nixos tides. Each bore the governor's private seal. Each whispered to him in flashes of memory he could not shut out. In his dim mechanical mind, he saw the governor as a child kneeling before a small model of a world with 2 moons. He remembered her tracing her fingers over the second sphere's grooves, murmuring a name he could not now pronounce. The memory faded like dust, leaving only the echo of a command. "When the second eye opens, bring me the door." As weeks passed, Varela 9's nights deepened. Shadows lengthened even at noon. Farmers began planting crops by Nixos light rather than Pallius. Songs emerged in the worker camps, muttered, recounting harvests under the mirrored eye. The ecclesiarchy tried to suppress them, but the hymns returned in new forms, embedded in work chants, in children's games, in the low drone of servitors threshing fields at dusk. Magos geologists drilled into Nixos's crust. Their reports arrived, sealed and unmarked. The few paragraphs made public spoke of strata, arranged not in layers, but in concentric labyrinths, like a shell built inward. Cores taken from deeper than 3 kilometers simply vanished before reaching the lab. Instruments failed in a pattern too deliberate for accident. Those who touched the samples complained of hearing rustling paper inside their skulls. One repeated a phrase from no known dialect, "Seal intact, archive pending." He bit off his own tongue before medics arrived. Through it all, Governor Thalorian's public demeanor never shifted. He gave speeches from his balcony, extolling the bounty of dual tides and blessings of imperial providence. He hosted balls under the twin moons, masks glittering with mirrored glass. He signed decrees with the sigil that now adorned the sky. When an Inquisitorial dispatch demanded an explanation, his reply was a single data slate containing star maps centuries out of date, with Nixos marked clearly as if it had always been there. The message attached read, "You forgot." Whether Nixos was a warp intrusion, a demonic construct, or something older and stranger remains unconfirmed. No demonic signatures flare from its surface. No warp storms gather. It simply orbits, perfect and patient, reflecting the governor's seal in crater and ridge, as if the moon itself were a wax impression of some unseen document. Pilgrims have begun gathering on the high ridges of Varela 9 to watch it rise, muttering oaths, not to the emperor, but to the second eye. Imperial censors confiscate the pamphlets, but new ones appear overnight in the hands of peasants who cannot read. In the palace archives, Tavius shuffles another stack of maps into their shelves. His augmetic eyes glitch at the image of Nixos. He feels the warmth of the vault door beneath the east wing, even from here. He cannot speak, he cannot warn, but in the silent hum of the cogitators, he hears the whisper of a moon he should not have known, filing him, cataloging him, waiting for him to remember the command he has carried since childhood. Nix OS continues to orbit, a second pupil in the sky. The farmers still bow when its light touches their fields. The governor still smiles, and above them all hangs a question no prayer can erase. If the moon was not built and not placed, then where has it been hiding, and who finally decided to show it? Behind the eastern wing of Governor Thalorian's palace lay a courtyard no servitor entered, no drone patrolled, no map acknowledged. From above, it appeared as little more than an overgrown atrium, hemmed in by spires of oxidized copper and black-veined marble. But those who passed near its wrought iron gates spoke of a scent that did not belong in any catalogued flora scent, both sweet and acrid, like incense spilled on old meat. The wind that curled over its moss-lined walls carried whispers, indistinct and rhythmic, as though the plants themselves recited liturgies when the stars aligned. It was not called a garden in official ledgers. In fact, it wasn't called anything at all. The section was listed only as structural recess, but in hushed tones passed between dismissed stewards and disgraced functionaries. It bore a name that stank of age, the Rotwell. The soil there had never been turned by plow or blessed by ecclesiarchy rites. It was packed black with the finger bones of those harvested from the surrounding hive's lower strata. Not slain outright, no. That would be wasteful, but selected. Once every cycle, precisely at the turning of Virelinine's twin moons, a call commenced. Quiet, sanctioned, names chosen from the public registry by an algorithm that was never explained. The dead were not burned, not buried. They were offered one digit from each body, preserved in waxed scroll cases and planted in rows. Beneath hand-selected bulbs bred not for beauty, but for memory. The blooms that grew from these macabre seeds were neither natural nor easily described. They resembled orchids in shape, but each petal bore striations that shifted in the light lines that, when traced correctly, formed words, not written, whispered. Every flower spoke a name, not aloud, but in the mind of anyone who stepped within reach, and not the names of the dead, the names of those still living. Names the flowers should not have known. Only the governor walked there, not daily, not predictably, but in the late hours of Varela's double dusk, when the sky melted into mirrored rust and gold. She could sometimes be seen through distant scopes, moving barefoot through the paths, her robes trailing in the dust. She carried no tools. She never pruned. She did not water. She merely listened. It is said that the true name of every governor is hidden. Not the public honorific, not the title bestowed by the Administratum, but the root name, the soul name that binds the office to the world itself. Such names are never spoken, even to the self, for to speak them is to unmask the pact between sovereign and soil. That name, it was whispered, lived beneath one of the blooms. The garden was not static. New flowers appeared with each cull. Others withered not from age, but from disuse. Their petals curled, not in decay, but in refusal, as if the names they carried had ceased to serve their purpose, or worse, had been spoken. No corpse was ever exhumed, but the roots of the flowers grew thick with tissue flesh textures, and when Kutaz's one over-curious assistant once attempted, they bled. Not sap, not ichor, blood, human, warm. The assistant vanished within a day. The governor claimed she had transferred her off-world, but the next dusk, a new bloom sprouted near the garden's edge. It bore no petals, only a single open eye, ringed with violet lashes. It wept the first week, then it blinked, then it whispered. 2. When a junior adept from the Order Dialogus attempted to catalog the garden's flora for ritual classification, her notes descended into phonetic gibberish halfway through the first folio. What began as descriptions, curvature aligns with lunar geometry, iridescent memory threading on third petal, soon shifted into glossolalia. A page near the end repeated one phrase 9 times. The name behind the name, behind the name. She was taken from my... Her tongue had turned black, despite no physical injury. In the presence of the garden, time wavered. Visitors rare, sanctioned, and never twice reported feeling as though they had been standing within its gates for hours, when only minutes had passed. One ecclesiarch reported the opposite, a 5-minute inspection that, upon returning to the palace, was discovered to have lasted 3 days. He aged visibly. His hair whitened. His boots rotted off his feet. He died the following dawn, muttering a child's nursery rhyme no one recognized. No technology worked properly within the garden. Auspex units fuzzed, Vox units failed to transmit. Drones lost control and drifted into the foliage, where their machine minds stuttered into silence. When retrieved, their data cores were not erased but overwritten, filled with low-frequency hums, punctuated by intermittent syllables that, when amplified, sounded disturbingly like human breath. It was not worship. It was not sacrifice. It was cultivation. The governor did not kneel within the garden. She did not pray. She walked through it as one walks through memory gently, with familiarity, but without love. The names spoken by the blooms did not frighten her. They reported to her a census of truths, not written in ledgers, but rooted in decay. It is believed, though never proven, that one of the blooms carries her name, her true name, and should anyone ever find it, should anyone ever speak it, the pact would end. The planet would revert. The moons would cease orbit. The soil would choke. Or perhaps, the garden would bloom all at once, and the names would no longer whisper, but scream. Tavia, the broken servitor, who remembered too much, once lingered near the garden's outer gate during a rerouting of archival slates. He paused. His augmetic optics glitched. The flowers nearest the iron bars twisted toward him. One of them bloomed open wide, its petals forming letters. Not his name, a command. Soon. He could not obey. Not yet. But somewhere beneath the roots, his name waited, too planted long ago, by hands he no longer remembered. In the garden, where names rot, nothing ever truly dies. The first child vanished during the dusk shift, slipping unseen from a line of laborers assigned to grain crate inspection at Dockway Gamma. Her name was Sally Jen, 8 years old, daughter of a cogitator sweeper and a grainsip, known for humming too loudly and hiding her ration bars under broken floor grates. No one noticed at first. She'd wandered before. But when the second vanished the next day, this time, a boy, this time from a different district, the pattern began to take root, like mold behind paint. Within 2 weeks, the count reached 20. By the end of the third month, over 100 children were gone, all under 12, all from the lower sectors. None returned. The governor's address was swift, composed, and useless. Unsanctioned cult activity, she declared from her obsidian throne, draped in mourning silk, stitched with star patterns that no world in the system could match. They come for our children because they fear our future, she said, voice smooth, eyes unreadable. We will cleanse them with imperial resolve. The crowd did not cheer. They watched her lips, listened to her intonation, wondered silently why she never once said the names of the missing Arbite squads swept the tunnels. Flame units scoured the underhabs. Servo skulls with Vox thieves descended into steam vents, their sensors blinking back static and heat spikes that made no geological sense. Reports described flickers of motion just outside Ospec's range low to the ground. Too fast for two-legged movement, but too controlled to be animal. In one corridor, a squad claimed to hear the children singing a lullaby, words rearranged into nonsense. The same phrase again and again, under the root, above the scream, where the name forgets its skin. None of the Arbites returned. Then came the laughter. At first, it echoed faintly up through maintenance shafts, brief, breathy, always just past the threshold of understanding. Not hysterical, not mocking, curious, patient, a sound too clean for these depths. It didn't belong to any single child. It wasn't pitched like anything human. Some claimed it sounded like an echo forced into wrong architecture, laughter that bent down narrow ducts and came out smiling. Maintenance teams began refusing assignments. Lights flickered without power loss. Entire sectors blinked out for seconds at a time, then reappeared with no loss of system logs except one. The timestamp always read exactly 1 second before the outage. Something rewrote the clockwork as it moved. Hive Tertian 21 sat atop layers of its own dead history. As each generation built upward, the previous was left to rot beneath, sealed, but never destroyed. Maps of the lower levels were vague, unfinished, some deliberately erased. The governor's palace itself rested on the bones of 5 former command centers. All collapsed or decommissioned, none fully explored. When whispers suggested the source lay directly beneath her estate, she denied them with perfect calm. "If something laughs," she said, "let it laugh itself to silence." But one servitor knew better. Tavius, whose corrupted memory fragments had begun to stitch themselves into broken continuity, recalled a staircase. Not a real one, a hidden one. A spiral set into the stone beneath the central chambers, Holidaeus. He remembered descending it once as a boy, barefoot, holding a candle that never went out. Beside him, the governor, not this one, but the one before her. Or perhaps the one before that held his hand and whispered the names of flowers that did not exist. He remembered reaching the bottom and seeing a wall with mouths, and then the laughter. Now, in his servitor shell, he felt its pull again. The maintenance levels of Hive Tertian 21 were not merely service corridors. They were a palimpsest of intention, layered with lies. Pipes led to nowhere, valves bled ink, ducts carried whispers instead of air. A scribe once found a hatch labeled Reverence Intake. When opened, it revealed a drop into blackness that swallowed Auspex pings entirely. He sealed it. He resigned. He hanged himself before his retirement ritual could be performed. Beneath the governor's quarters, Vox Static began to carry harmonics. Not sounds, structures. Analysts found repeated waveforms that formed the shape of a child's skull. When run through sonic translation, the laughter grew more frequent, more insistent. Not louder, never loud, but closer. One Arbit's team left behind a single vid capture before transmission failed. It showed a corridor dimly lit by flickering lumen strips. Something crawled along the ceiling, not mechanical, not demonic, not recognizably biological. It paused, tilted its head, and laughed. The vid ended. The sound did not. The governor announced a day of mourning. She wore veils. She wept without tears. She offered a bounty for any proof of underground heresy. But the people had stopped listening to her words. They watched her shadows. They saw how they moved out of sync with her gestures. They noticed that her mouth never fully closed when she smiled in the blovels. Flowers bloomed from between the crackspell blossoms, with no known genetic ancestry, their petals twitching when no wind blew. Scribbled messages in blood appeared on the walls, not warnings, but invitations. "We are still playing. One read. Come find us." The blood matched no known citizens. The names had been erased before they were born. Tavius found himself rerouted one night to a maintenance shaft he didn't remember existing. His lenses blurred. His servitor limbs hesitated. A door stood open. Inside, a staircase spiral, narrow, identical to the one from his fractured memory. As he descended, the temperature dropped, but he did not feel cold. The laughter welcomed him, not threatening, familiar. The cadence of a name he had forgotten how to hear. Below, in the dark, something waited. Not monstrous, not divine. A structure, a pattern, a lineage given shape and echoes. The infrastructure of the hive was not merely mechanical. It was a cathedral built of bone memories, wiring rituals, and names spoken backward. The children had not vanished. They had been called. The laughter still comes, now stronger, now constant, rising like pressure behind the walls. It doesn't seek escape. It doesn't seek followers. It seeks only remembrance. Every laugh is a syllable. Every giggle a birthright. The children are below, smiling, waiting, and their voices are stitched into the walls. Hive-Ter, CENTRA-21, breathes differently now. You can feel it in the lift of the floor, the faint tremble of doors, and if you press your ear to the ground long enough, you'll hear it. Not weeping, not screams, endless, rising laughter. Shaped like names, no one dares speak. Aide Provost Cern Vaylor was not a man given to superstition. His service record stretched across 3 Administratum sectors without a single blemish. He had filed census audits during planetary pandemics, redrafted tithe quotas during system-wide and once negotiated 3 trade tariffs simultaneously while his left lung collapsed from atmosphere degradation. He trusted in protocol, in the weight of parchment and seal, in the structure of function. But none of that prepared him for Governor Thalorian's silence. At first it seemed a matter of health. The governor withdrew from public oratory, citing a vocal affliction caused by prolonged exposure to pollen anomalies. Her speeches were replaced with recorded statements, played through filtered vox grills embedded in the palace walls. The voice was hers, close enough, but lacked breath. No pauses for thought, no rhythm of flesh and mind, just pronouncements, smooth as liquid glass, parsed through machines that hummed at a frequency Cern eventually began to feel in his teeth. He noticed small things first. Orders arrived, with no chain of custody. Data slates appeared on his desk unsigned, each bearing a symbol in the upper left corner, a twisting knot that pulsed faintly when he blinked too long. Not a sigil of any known house. Not an aquila, not a seal, just a mark, like a worm curling into itself. He tried to remove it from the slate once. The glyph bled, not metaphorically. Ink spilled out, dark and viscous, pooling across his papers. He threw the slate away. The next morning, another appeared, the same symbol, the same orders, slightly different wording, slightly deeper curve in the glyph. These weren't decisions made by committee. They weren't structured resolutions processed through the legislative hall. They were transmissions, dictates with no signature, but undeniable authority. They flowed directly into the planetary machine, revising food distribution, adjusting trade priorities, reclassifying entire sectors as non-essential human zones. The bureaucrats obeyed. The scribes filed. No one asked who had written them. Cern began keeping 2 ledgers, one for official edicts, one for the originalist orders. The first was filled in his clear, clipped script. The second, over time, changed. He found himself transcribing phrases he didn't remember reading, words in syntaxes too old or too warped to belong in Imperial Gothic. He woke one morning with ink-stained fingers and an entry in the second ledger he did not recall writing. It read, "Speak not with the mouth, speak with the structure." The governor still moved through the palace. He saw her in passing, always flanked by servitors, with sealed vox grills and lens-shuttered eyes. But she no longer looked directly at anyone. Her steps were too smooth. Her breathing, when it came, was too quiet-timed, not with her movement, but with the flicker of lumen strips above her. He passed her once in the Hall of Petitioners. Her shadow did not follow her body. It moved slightly ahead, as if anticipating her. Then came the dreams. They began as static, vague flickers of light behind his closed eyelids, mechanical clicking, faint voices in the walls of sleep, then symbols, diagrams etched in bone light across infinite black surfaces. One night, he awoke with a phrase in his mouth, spoken in a language he had never learned. Function precedes origin. When he tried to write it down, his stylus snapped. His teeth ached for a day. He confronted the palace logi priest, demanding to know the source of the new orders. The priest said nothing, only turned and gestured to a wall. Not a console, a blank stone wall. Cern stared, expecting mockery. Then he heard it, a soft, reverberating hum. Not mechanical, architectural, as if the walls themselves were breathing, listening, and then speaking. He put his ear to the stone. No voice, no words, but impressions, directives. Remove the third-tier grain lines, condense the census districts, strip names from sectors with too many consonants, Nonsense but written, they made sense. The wall was not speaking language. It was emitting decision. By the end of the week, he stopped receiving slates. The decisions no longer needed transcription. The cogitators printed the forms already signed. The scribes processed them as law. His role narrowed first to reviewer, then to observer, and finally to something worse, conduit. He noticed when he was near certain panels, his thoughts drifted, not randomly, deliberately. He would begin formulating policy changes, ones he would never have approved before, more efficient, less humane. Decisions about population flow, about unsustainable redundancy. And then he would find the forms already printed, already bearing his name. He confronted the governor directly, bursting into her private sanctum during one of her speech recordings. She stood facing a wall, unmoving, vox unids embedded in the stone, hissing low pulses behind her. She did not turn. He shouted, he begged, he asked, who is making these decisions? The answer came from the wall, not sound, a wave, a weight, a pressure in his skull that flattened his thoughts into diagrams. He saw an image, then not a face, not a mind, but a structure, a palace that thought, a network of corridors wired into liturgy, a language made of stone. The governor was not obeying commands. She was the command, or worse, she was the mouth through which the palace itself spoke. He collapsed. When he awoke, he was outside the sanctum. His tongue was dry. His name was gone from the official logs for 2 days. When it returned, it was spelled differently. Now, he speaks less, writes even less. The wall gives him everything. He receives dreams where entire policies arrive preformed, not ideas. The tone of the voice within the palace has shifted. It no longer echoes. It asks, not for permission, for agreement. There is no rebellion, no uprising, no demon, only policy, only structure. The building thinks, and within its bones, the governor moves like a lung inhaling silence. No more data slates arrive. The decisions appear. The voices hum. The walls breathe. And CERN, once an aide, now walks the corridors slowly, feeling each panel with his hand, listening for the next idea that does not come from him, but will carry his name. The palace no longer houses authority. It is authority once every 50 years. Varela 9 enters a silence so total that even the wind stops breathing. On the night of convergence, when Pallia wanes and Nyxos waxes full, the streets go dark. Not from failure or curfew, but from preparation. The lights are extinguished by hand, one by one, in ritual order. No bells toll. No announcements echo. No music rises. The citizens emerge masked, robed, and wordless, each bearing a single red candle. From the manufactorum hives to the high-vaulted mansions, they walk the streets as if mourning something too sacred to name. The ceremony is not an imperial holiday. It appears nowhere in ecclesiarchal liturgy, nor does it match the timing of any known saint's feast. Yet, it is observed more devoutly than the emperor's own Ascension Day. To refuse is unthinkable. To ask why is unwise. The records claim the festival commemorates the deliverance, but no historian can agree what was delivered, or from whom. The earliest mention of the tradition comes not from religious texts, but from the private letters of Governor Elirith Valorian, nearly 600 years past. In a correspondence marked "Eyes Only," she wrote, "The Count is always exact. That is how we know he still watches. No one knows who he is." In the weeks leading to the festival, the palace ceases all official business. Orders are suspended. Tides shipments are held at dock. Even the Mechanicus enclaves agree to halt labor, a concession unheard of in any other system. All production shifts to one thing: the candles. They are not wax. They are not paraffin. Their composition is known only to a single enclave of bonded chemists who do not speak and do not leave their cathedral. Each candle burns red, not red painted, but red burning and gives off no heat. The light has been tested. It emits wavelengths inconsistent with fire. The scent is faintly metallic, with a trace of sulfur and something else, something no one can identify, but that every citizen knows from dreams. The masks worn are simple, blank, porcelain white, no expression, no eye holes. Each is shaped to fit the face of the wearer perfectly, as if molded from birth. Some claim they find their masks in old trunks left by ancestors. Others receive them in silence from strangers, days before the event. None speak during the exchange. None forget the fit. The dancers arrive as if conjured. They are never seen before the first candle is lit. Dressed in robes the color of dying embers, they move through the crowds with impossible grace. Their movements follow no known pattern, yet every footstep seems deliberate. Some citizens swear the dancers do not age between festivals. Others claim to recognize long-dead relatives among their number. Attempts to photograph them fail. The images always blur. Not motion blur, identity blur. Faces smoothed out. Limbs stretched too long. Backgrounds flicker with impossible geometry. The candles are lit at exactly 9:09 local time. Always by an unseen signal. Each citizen lights theirs in unison, despite separation by kilometers. There is no central countdown, no vox, just knowledge, as if the timing is passed from breath to breath across the populace. Once lit, no candle may be extinguished until it dies naturally. To let one fall is considered the highest taboo. Those whose candles go out do not return the next day. Their homes are found empty, their names already removed from registries. No record of departure, just absence. Every citizen carries their candle through the streets in silence. They do not speak. They do not deviate. The dancers weave among them, never touching, never stopping. Children participate without fear. Infants are carried, their candles cradled against their chests. Even the infirm are wheeled through the city in procession, their hands trembling but steady around the flame. When dawn approaches, the candles burn low. At the final moment, when the first light of Varella's sun breaches the horizon, the flames extinguish all at once. No smoke, no ember, just an instant end. The masks are then placed on the ground, and the citizens return to their homes. Still wordless, still knowing, the number of candles burned is always counted. A final tally is submitted to the palace. It always matches the exact living population of the planet, every time. Not registered citizens, not declared, actual. When asked how such a count is possible, the scribes say nothing. When pressed, they say only, he would know. Governor Thalorian has never spoken during the festival. She watches from the highest balcony, her own candle held motionless before her. Her mask differs only slightly veined, with thin black cracks, as if stress-marked by unseen heat. She does not dance. She does not walk. She waits. Some believe she receives messages during this night, orders, visions, perhaps even names. Some say the number of candles determines how many will be taken in the coming decade. Others say the festival is the tithe. In one failed attempt to disrupt a ritual, a visiting inquisitor declared the ceremony heretical. He burned a candle early, alone, in his quarters, and announced he would observe from within. At 9:09, he vanished. His quarters were locked. The security feed recorded only static during the hour. When the candles extinguished, his voice was heard across the vox for 3 seconds. Too many faces. No one blinked. The transmission ended. His name was quietly removed from the rosters. Tavia, still bound in his servitor husk, now carries candles during the preparation cycles. His task is mechanical arrangement, weight check, packaging. But when he touches the base of each candle, something old stirs. He remembers lifting one as a child, not for a festival, for an offering, to something beneath the palace that glowed red, not with fire, but hunger. He cannot speak, but his hands tremble when he touches a mask. The festival endures. It needs no doctrine, no proclamation, no enforcement. It simply happens. The candles appear, the masks are worn, the dancers come, and beneath it all, in silence deeper than sleep, the planet counts itself one flame at a time. It began in the early hours of the tertiary cycle, when the system's long-range Voxnet was at its quietest, between trade acknowledgements, between astropathic syncs. A channel opened without request, without clearance, and began to speak. Not a pulse, not static, but a voice, calm, familiar, precise. Governor Thalorian. She read names one by one. No titles, no no clarification, just names, spoken in a cadence too slow for roll call, too deliberate for administration. The tone never shifted. No introduction, no end. Riga All, Vistron Kel, Laura Nemeth, Sol Fek, Edrin Ma, Orthia Quen. At first, it was dismissed as a bureaucratic misfire, a clerical loop. Perhaps a corrupted log being accidentally Administratum tech clerks began inquiries. The frequency was one normally reserved for planetary distress relays. A narrowband stream hard-coded into the sector's emergency grid. But there was no emergency alert, no attached data, just the voice, calm and unbroken, reciting. After the first hour, attention shifted from irritation to concern. The voice never stumbled, never repeated. The pronunciation remained flawless, even for names drawn from dialects extinct before the rise of the Imperium. It knew tribal cadences from dead moons, merchant surnames lost in transit centuries ago, even forbidden hexclan titles struck from record by the Inquisition. No cogitator could have generated such fluid inflection. No archive held that many names. In the fourth hour, someone realized the list was not random. The names had patterns, rhythmic intervals, shared phonetics, across multiple dialects and legacy naming conventions. Listeners began to notice echo syllables that returned, rearranged, mutated. The deeper one listened, the more they began to feel that the names were not identifiers. They were instructions. Choir astropaths attempted to mute the signal. They failed. No one could trace its origin, but every trace led back to the same place, the governor's private sanctum, a chamber supposedly soundproofed and disconnected from the sector's vox grid. The palace staff denied it. The signal, they insisted, did not exist. By hour 5, psychers began bleeding, not from the ears, from the eyes. One burst into flame, mid-communion, screaming a single phrase in Proto-Gothic. He calls the archive by name. Others went silent and did not wake. Word spread. Ships in orbit rerouted around the system. Administratum functionaries shut down local channels, but it was too late. The signal pulsed through every relay point like a heartbeat. Even those who had not heard it directly found themselves whispering names they'd never read. A tech priest muttered 37 in his sleep. An off-world pilot from the Meridius Reach confessed to seeing one of the names etched into the frost on his ship's bulkhead. He jettisoned himself into void before dawn. The vox never stopped. Then came the final name, spoken more slowly, with weight, Caltrin, Vess. A silence followed to full seconds of dead air, the first break in the stream, then static, then nothing. The name did not appear in any system. No birth registries, no census, no tithe rolls, not in the current sector, not in the adjacent 10. The Inquisition scoured planetary records. Nothing. Then a data savant, too young to know caution, cross-referenced exploratory logs from long-abandoned subsector scrawlings. He found something. Caltrin Vess was the designation for a world listed in a centuries-old colonization proposal. A planet considered uninhabitable, never seeded, never mapped, no known location. The proposal had been marked denied in 4 languages, then deleted, but someone had preserved the name in red ink along the margin, handwritten and underlined 3 times. When the savant presented his findings, he wept. Within the hour, every data slate containing the name Keltron Vess corrupted, not wiped from. Text bent into spiral glyphs. Images became oil smears. Machine spirits recoiled. Several cogitators refused to power on. Others began broadcasting static in the rhythm of human breath. Governor Thalorian made no statement. When pressed by the remaining Vox ministry, she sent a single word in reply. Received. The signal had ended, but the damage had not. Across the sector, scribes found their personal notes rewritten, handwritten logs replaced with new entries listing unfamiliar names. Prison rolls spontaneously updated, adding inmates that no one remembered arresting. In one instance, an entire school roster changed overnight. Teachers insisted the new names matched their memories. Parents disagreed, to committed suicide. Within the palace, the servants stopped speaking altogether. Even Tavius, trapped within his shell, felt the names clawing at the edge of recognition. He could not recall his own, but he knew those spoken. He had heard them whispered once in the garden, twice beneath the vault, and now a third time in the silence between candlelight and sleep. Some said the governor had spoken the names as a summoning. Others said it was a confession. But those who listened closely heard something else. A pattern, not just of names, but of sequence, of revelation, as if she had been calling attendance in a classroom that hadn't yet been built. Keltron Vess may not exist, or perhaps it waits. Some believe the final name is not a world, but a door. The Vox is quiet now, but every speaker still hums faintly when left on too long, and in that hum, if you close your eyes, you may still hear her voice, not calling dot, counting dot. The courier came veiled in gold, his transport emblazoned with the twin-headed Aquila and the red lacquered seal of Terra. He disembarked with no fanfare, flanked by silence rather than escort. He did not present identification. He did not speak. He simply held the scroll, a cylinder of auramite-veined adamant, sealed at both ends with the wax of the High Lords, stamped by 3 sigils, the Senatorem Imperialis, the Ordo Hereticus, and most strangely, the Officio Prefectus. No one outside the Segmentum Command had clearance to see all 3 marks on the same document. It was not addressed to the governor by name. It was addressed to the seat of compliance, Varela 9, not a person, a structure, a position, a title. The palace archivists were confused. The governor was not. She received the courier in her throne chamber without hesitation. Her attendants stood to either side, robes like ink, shadows against the glimmering floor. The scroll was offered with both hands. She did not reach for it. She only smiled. Witnesses recall her expression precisely serene, pleasant, untouched. Her fingers never moved. The courier remained motionless for 47 seconds, then set the scroll on the stone dais before her and stepped back. Then it began to burn. No flame, no spark. The gold casing darkened, blackened, and hissed. Wax liquefied, not dripping, but vanishing. The surface peeled in layers of white-hot flake, as if a sun had been sealed inside. There was no heat felt in the room, no pressure, just a low, brittle sound like parchment folding itself in half again and again until it was dust. By the end, nothing remained, not ash, not stain. The stone showed no mark of scorch. The only proof the scroll had ever existed was in the trembling of the courier's hands. He turned without bow or farewell and walked out of the chamber, his golden boots leaving no sound on the floor. The governor finally spoke. That will not be necessary. No one asked what she meant. Attempts to reconstruct the event failed. Surveillance picked captures of the chamber were present, but the scroll did not appear in them. The courier's silhouette was visible only when not looking directly at Itwin's slowed frame B-frame. His outline blurred into absence. Administratum records show an inbound signal from a ship with a registered Terra origin, but the signal degraded upon arrival. No logs were left. The ship, it was said, returned to orbit. When scouts attempted to locate it, the vessel had vanished from long-range augurs. Word spread quickly, not just that the governor had received a writ from Terra, but that Terra had been denied. The implications struck deeper than any rebellion. Heresy could be named, crushed, punished, but refusal cold, elegant, unquestioned, was something else. The planetary elite whispered of it with awe. The lower ranks spread rumors like plague spores. The scroll did not burn. It was unmade. She never opened it because she already knew. She didn't refuse the order. The planet did. Among the astropaths, panic spread. One choir conductor attempted to reach Terra for confirmation. His voice returned inverted, syllables inside out. The receiving choir at Segmentum Command collapsed. No message was logged. One junior adept, tasked with cleansing the chamber post-event, swept the dais with Auspec's tools. He found nothing, but later that night, he discovered a thin layer of black flakes coating his robes. He tasted one, perhaps by accident, perhaps by compulsion. The next morning, he was found reciting the names from the governor's prior Vox broadcast, except now. He wept with each one. At the end of the list, he whispered, "You don't command what you don't own." Then he bit off his own fingers. No further writs arrived. No inquiries followed. It was as though the attempt had never happened. The governor continued her functions. She smiled in public ceremonies. She walked her private garden. She lit her red candle on the night of the festival without incident. When asked by a daring emissary from a neighboring system whether she had ever received a communique from the High Lords, her answer was simple: "We receive only what remains." Later, when the emissary attempted to submit a formal report, his Vox logs were found overwritten. His memories, when tested by sanctioned psychers, displayed gaps that pulsed with noise when probed. At the center of that noise was a single sigil, not the Aquila. A circle made of 3 lines, intersecting like a knot without beginning or end. The same mark that had appeared on the data slates issued weeks before the name-reading signal. The same mark blooming like a flower in the archival The same mark carved faintly into the corner of the dais where the scroll had vanished. Tavius, broken servant and unwilling witness, passed the chamber weeks later. His optic lenses blinked. His pace faltered. He paused before the empty stone where the writ had burned. The mark was still there, faint, embedded in the stone like a memory. He couldn't speak, but a word flickered through his fragmentary mind: not written, not spoken. Sovereignty, but not in the way the Imperium meant it. Not command, not rule, but possession, a knowing, a claim. The High Lords had issued a decree. It had arrived. It had been rejected, not argued, not contested, rejected by the world itself. There was no recourse, no escalation. Varela 9 had spoken in the only language it now understood. Silence that consumes. And the governor still smiled. His name had once been Merrick Harn, archivist, second tier, oath-bound, under the Lex Meme, trained in the deep protocols of sanctioned recollection. Not a scribe, not a clerk, an instrument of memory. He had served beneath 4 governors, had held in his mind the tithing cycles of 2 centuries, the orbital shift logs of Palia and Nixos, and the migration charts of every hive sector, from Batenal to the outer veins. His mind had not just stored information, it had become architecture, categorized, indexed, layered, until it began to unlayer itself. Merrick worked in vault, divescent buried beneath 30 meters of blessed granite, insulated against warp flux, silence sealed by the ecclesiarchy during the foundation of the palace itself. Within the vault were records too dangerous to trust to machine, too volatile to encode. Thought prisons, they were sometimes called, and Merrick was their keeper. The first time something slipped, he was reading a confession. It came from a mid-hive preacher. dated nearly 300 years prior, who had been arrested for claiming that the Emperor did not watch Varela 9, that someone else had taken the gaze. The preacher's words were unremarkable madness, mostly, but one line caught Merrick's attention. He only pretends to wear the mask. It is not his face. He remembered that sentence days later, exactly as it had been spoken, though he'd never committed it to memory. It rang like a bell through other records. A land charter signed by the first governor, Thalorian, bore a handwritten margin note, "For the one who wears the name, but not the flesh." A flagellation report from a cult cleansing 147 years ago included a child's drawing a mask, broken down the middle, with 2 mouths beneath. And then, the repetition began, across hundreds of years. In entries seemingly unrelated, the same phrase appeared, subtle, rearranged, but unmistakable. The planet belongs to him no longer. A condemned dockmaster, who gouged out his own eyes, had etched it into the side of a grain crate using his teeth. A tax scribe erased an entire census to write it across the floor of her barracks in chalk. A mid-level adepta, Soritas, Canoness, once whispered it mid-sermon, and was burned before she could speak a second word. The phrase recurred in the mouths of the broken, the forgotten, the burned, not in public speeches, in footnotes, in margins, in dreams. Merrick compiled them. He didn't know why. Some instinct deeper than logic. He began to see the symmetry. One confession every 33 years, each from a different sector, a different caste. Never the same bloodline, but always the same phrasing, always the same claim. It was not rebellion, it was revelation. He tried to bring it to his superior. The conversation never happened. The next morning, his superior's desk was cleared, his name wiped from the registrar. When Merrick checked the staff rotas, his own access code had been used to authorize the deletion. He stopped sleeping. He began waking to find records altered handwritten notes in his own script that he didn't remember creating. One read, "You do not carry memory. You host it." Another simply said, "He forgives nothing built in his name." There was no he defined. The records refused to clarify. Then, Merrick saw himself, not in a mirror, in a log. An ancient entry, marked as observation, auditory distortion, from a palace interior maintenance report dated 200 years prior. It described a man matching his appearance precisely, found wandering the archive levels, muttering phrases about planetary custody and the echo of denied dominion. The man had disappeared before identification. The signature at the bottom of the report was smudged, but his surname remained, Harn. He submitted a request to the local tech priests for partial mind erasure. It was denied. No grounds for instability. He submitted it again this time. Higher clearance. Denied. He began demanding it. He stormed the memory clinic in the Sublaville Medicaid sector, screaming for neural collapse, for a purity purge, for death of thought. He wept in front of servo attendants, knelt before lock. When restrained, he shouted only one phrase over and over, "I was not supposed to remember me." They sedated him, locked him in the quiet room. That night, he wrote, not with stylus, with blood, across the floor, the walls, the bedding, his own name, again and again, intersected with the phrase, "He who carries the scroll does not carry the will." Tavius was tasked with cleaning the cell. He entered, expression blank, hands twitching. His servitor shell recognized the blood as irrelevant matter. But somewhere inside, the fragmented boy within remembered the phrase. He looked at the man curled against the wall, eyes open, mouth mumbling nothing. The moment their eyes met, Merrick smiled. It was the kind of smile reserved not for greeting, but for recognition, as if he had been waiting. He whispered, "Tell the archive it's waking up." The next day, Merrick Harn was found catatonic. His brain showed no trauma. His mind, however, was gone, not damaged, not erased, Displaced. No record remains of his request logs. His handwriting samples no longer match. His ledger entries now read in mirror. His final archival folder flagged in quarantine contains no text, only a single phrase etched in the subcode of the parchment weave. The planet belongs to him no longer. They've tried to delete it. The ink reappears at the center of Virilane's capital. Framed by the spire-crowned skyline and cobbled causeways, stood the monument of Aegis Eternala, towering bronze statue of the Emperor in his radiant prime. It loomed over the Grand Plaza, arms outstretched in benediction, one hand clutching a sword wreathed in flame, the other raised in the gesture of silence. It had stood unchanged for nearly 4 centuries. Commissioned by Governor Haven Thalorian during the planet's second reconstruction, a feat of devotion and metallurgy, it was cast from alloys drawn from Varela's deepest veins, its foundation etched with the litanies of flame, and sanctified by a full delegation of the Adeptus Minis to Rum, until it changed. Not subtly, not gradually, not hidden. One morning, the city awoke and found that the statue had a second face, not beside the first, not replacing it, but grown outward from the back of the skull, gazing in the opposite direction downward and away, where the Emperor's forward face bore the stern majesty of divine justice. The second face was softer, almost thoughtful, lips half-parted, brow furrowed, not in fury, but in remembrance. And beneath the sculpted surface, the tooling was perfect, seamless bronze. Chisel marks aligned with the grain of the original casting. The patina matched the rest of the body exactly. No weld lines, no retrofitting, no evidence of alteration. The artisans who had forged the monument swore, under oath and threat of excommunication, that the second face had not existed the day before. Architectural records, pict captures, even commemorative coins, all showed a single face. Yet now, every representation from hololiths to etchings had changed. Slowly, inevitably, images taken years before now depicted both faces, as though they had always been there. And when questioned, most residents insisted they remembered it that way. Even those who had stood beneath it every day of their lives. It always watched in 2 directions. One street merchant said, confused by the question, one for what we've done, one for what we haven't yet. The ecclesiarchy launched an immediate investigation. Cardinal Gerentis declared the alteration a heresy of the highest order and attempted to perform a purging right at the statue's base. The incense turned to ash in his hand. His sacred oils congealed into rust. As he began the incantation, he choked mid-verse, dropping to his knees, vomiting salt water mixed with black sand. He died the next day, lungs crystallized into something unclassifiable. His final words, recorded on a blurred vox, were, "The Emperor doesn't need the second face. He wore it long before we sculpted it." The governor made no statement. When pressed by the Ministorum envoy, she simply raised a single eyebrow and replied, "If you cannot recognize him, perhaps it is not his face that changed." Structural analysts from the Mechanicus dissected the statue with spectral aspects arrays. Every reading returned contradictory data. Density fluctuated across identical segments. Mass shifted depending on observer distance. One tech priest tried to touch the second face. His hand passed through it for the briefest moment, then recoiled. Covered in the ash of a metal that had never existed on he began speaking a language no one could parse. His mechadendrites curled into a spiral and fused. Asterisk. Crowds gathered, not in protest. In reverence, they stood for hours, staring at the statue. Some prayed to the first face, others to the second. A few whispered between them, arguing quietly over which had always been there. A fight broke out. No weapons. Just silence, broken by the clatter of teeth and blood on stone. Children born after the change were taught both faces. They knew no difference. They referred to the second as the face that knows us, and the first as the face that forgets. No one corrected them. When the Administratum tried to revise school curriculums, the data slates glitched, entries reverted. Teachers forgot corrections even as they made them. Then the dreams began. Low-level scribes, sanitation workers, servitors with advanced memory, buffers all reported seeing the statue in their sleep, but not as it was, as it grew. More faces, spiraling. Each turned toward a different quadrant of the city, each mouth murmuring something too soft to hear. In one recorded instance, a sleep talker repeated a phrase for over 2 hours. It is not he who shifts, it is the direction of prayer. Tavius wandered past the plaza in a programmed transit route. He paused beneath the statue, his optics refocused. One lens cracked. His servitor core stuttered for 6 seconds before restarting. In that time, something bled into him, not words, not memory, but shape. The contour of recognition, a pattern he could not name. Somewhere beneath the layers of enforced obedience and scraped thought, the boy he had once been remembered being carried into a room with 2 statues. One faced him, one faced away. No record exists of a second statue. Attempts to replicate the face through sculpting fail. Artists who try find their hands cramping, their eyes watering. One sculptor went blind after sketching it. Another carved the face from stone and then swallowed her chisel. The Ecclesiarchy declared the second face, unverified but permitted, a phrase with no precedent. The High Lords issued no further commentary. The Officio Prefectus labeled the plaza a region of symbolic ambiguity, which meant nothing but sounded official. The statue remains. It has not changed again. Not visibly, but some nights, when the wind is still and the plaza is empty, you can stand beneath it and look up, and no matter where you stand, one of the faces is always looking away. Not from disinterest, from memory. Because perhaps the statue did not shift at all. Perhaps we finally began to see both sides. The doors to the Violet Hall have not opened in over 300 years. They stand sealed by ordinance, not by lock. Archival law etched in gold filigree over black adamant, by decree of House Thalorian. The feast is to remain uninterrupted. At first, it was assumed ceremonial, another relic of Varela IX's Baroque, increasingly unreadable pageantry. The palace holds hundreds of such rooms and used salons, echoing amphitheaters, banquet galleries retired to memory. But the Violet Hall defied neglect. It never gathered dust. Its lights never flickered. It radiated heat, a low, pulsating warmth that seemed almost biological. What little is known begins with a guest list. 216 names, drawn from the highest echelons of Varela's nobility, Thalorian cousins, trade dynasts, exiled void merchant lords, rogue ecclesiarchs whose heresy was too refined to punish outright, all summoned for a single night, centuries ago, for a celebration whose occasion was never recorded. The banquet was said to honor the culmination of governance, a phrase whose ambiguity defied record. The guests entered. None emerged. No alarms were raised. No protests filed. No panicked servants. Only silence. The doors were sealed from within, and the feast continued. When a steward attempted entry 3 days later, the handle burned his hand to bone. The governor at the time, Illerith Thalorian, already 3 decades past the age of visible aging, declared that the feast had reached its apex and that no interruption could be permitted. They are still eating. This is not metaphor. Servo sent through the ceiling ductwork returned images before their feeds cut to static. Images of a hall, still lit by hovering crystal globes, casting violet light across a table to long for physics. The guests sat on moving forks raised, mouths open, eyes glazed with ecstasy or ruin. Their clothes had not decayed. Their bodies, while weathered, had not decomposed. One figure was seen mid-chew, the same morsel of glistening meat suspended between tongue and teeth for over a century. The plates replenished themselves, not visibly, not mechanically, but whenever a dish was cleared, it returned, remade, reshaped, more elaborate. The food shimmered with colors, not in the visible spectrum, layered with sauces that moved of their own accord. Wines dripped from nowhere into crystalline goblets. No servitors moved through the space. No servants attended, and yet the feast never stopped. An early probe detected atmospheric anomalies, time compression ratios, beyond mechanicus calibration. Inside, seconds stretched into days. Outside, centuries flickered past. The guests are not preserved by stasis. They are living every moment, slowly, excessively, forever. The laughter comes in pulses. Recordings catch brief bursts of it, giddy, trembling laughter that shifts pitch mid. Some sounds are too sharp, others too low. Once, a single name was spoken between giggles. Aethira, the name of a minor Thalorian cousin, last seen entering the hall. When pronounced aloud in the palace archive, the word caused 3 pixelates to melt. The tech clerk lost all sense of taste. The ecclesiarchy condemned the hall. The governor disagreed. She called the banquet a symbolic allegory for continuity. She referred to the attendees as the administrative strata of inherited function. She smiled when she said it, a low, tired smile, as if the metaphor was too old to resist anymore. Scribes, who attempted to remove the hall from palace, blueprints found their memory of its location slowly warped. Within a day, none could draw its position accurately. One began sketching a spiral instead. Another wrote the words, "They're still chewing," repeatedly in the margins of his assessment. He chewed his own fingers raw before being sedated. An inquisitorial team, sent covertly during the 49th year of the governor's reign, attempted forced entry. They brought Melta charges. The wall absorbed them, not resisted, absorbed. The devices vanished. No heat, no rupture, just a silence deeper than before. They left with nothing. The team leader left behind her a rosette. No note, no demand, just the emblem, placed gently before the doors. Tavius, long shackled in servitor form, was once ordered to deliver a cask of red-veined wine to an adjacent chamber. As he passed the violet hall, his optics failed. His limbs locked. Audio sensors registered a single frequency, an ultrasonic hum too perfect to be natural. Underneath it, layered like perfume overwrought, came a sound he would later recall in fragmented dreams. Wet, rhythmic, endless chewing. Inside the hall, none are dead. They do not die. They eat, and they moan, and they tremble under the weight of rapture drawn out across centuries. This is not sustenance. It is offering. The excess is not waste. It is devotion. The glistening meats, the self-replenishing wines, the sound of silverware clinking in time with some unseen breath, these are not symptoms. They are sacraments. Slaanesh accepts, not through chaos, but through perfection, to eat forever, at the apex of taste, at the apex of delay, at the edge of unbearable indulgence. This is worship. The governor knows. She dines in a separate hall, alone, sparsely, once per year, on the anniversary of the banquet's beginning. She takes a single bite from a blank plate and whispers a name, always different, never repeated. No one records the names. No one dares. There is no effort to end the banquet. No one speaks of it. The doors remain shut. The light beneath them spills and pulses. The air tastes faintly of sugar and rust near that wing of the palace. Music drifts through the vents, sometimes tuneless and slow, played on instruments that hum with voices. Instead of strings, they are still eating. They will never stop. And somewhere inside, behind eyelids crusted with ancient mascara, a noble lifts his fork again, not out of hunger, but because the ritual demands it, because it is the only motion left that means anything. The curtain was gray, not black. not violet. Gray softly faded, thickly woven, veined with age. It hung in the northwest corner of the governor's private chamber, between a rusted censer and a plinth bearing a statue with no head. It was never drawn, never mentioned, never cleaned. Even the most obsessive stewards skipped it during dusting, citing orders never issued. When asked what lay behind it, most palace staff blinked as though roused from a dream and simply said, nothing. The Inquisitor noticed her name was Tyran Hesk, Ordo Hereticus, bearing full investigative sanction from Segmentum. She arrived without pomp, dressed in midnight blue carapace and carrying a blade shaped like a crucifix. Her mission was clear: to verify the integrity of Varela Nine's governance, following 3 separate anomalies flagged by subsector auditors, the names broadcasted through the Vox, the statue that had grown a face, and the self-immolating writ from Terra. The governor greeted her with calm hospitality. Tea was served, incense burned, words were exchanged, polite, hollow, ritualistic. When the Inquisitor requested to examine the governor's private quarters, no resistance was offered. The governor gestured to the chamber herself. Then she left. The doors closed. Exactly 7 minutes later, all security picked feeds cut to black, Vox channels jammed, Auspex readings distorted. When contact was finally re-established, the chamber was empty. The Inquisitor was gone. No trace of combat, no breach. Her rosette, unburned, lay placed neatly atop the censer beside the curtain. The governor's only statement. She drew what should remain veiled. No further investigation followed, but someone still had to clean the room. Tavius was selected. Servitor designation 7C. Memory fractured. Stability compromised. Low priority asset. Disposable. He entered the chamber at precisely 400 under routine maintenance protocol. His ocular lenses activated automatically, recording everything in a 270-degree arc. His arms were fitted with auto-polishers and incense sprayers. His thoughts, as always, were held beneath 1,000 layers of silence. The room was quiet, but the curtain moved, not visibly, not with wind, but with presence. The cloth rippled in ways that did not align with gravity. It pulled slightly inward, as though the wall behind it had exhaled. Tavius paused, sensors adjusting. His optics glitched twice in rapid succession. Audio logs recorded nothing but ambient silence. Still, his core flagged the curtain for attention. He approached. He did not touch it. He began cleaning the space around it, meticulously. Slow, circular motions, precisely timed. But during the process, his left ocular lens captured something. Not light, not object, absence. A silhouette cast onto the wall beside the curtain that had no corresponding source. It pulsed, slow and soft, in perfect rhythm with the curtain's sway. It was shaped almost like an eye, not round, not human. Oval, vertical, rimmed with something like bone and something like metal. Within it, a faint shimmer, as if it were not seeing, but recording. Every 10 seconds, the shimmer brightened, like a blink in reverse. The reflection warped the chamber, bending the air into lines that did not follow any known spatial geometry. Tavius continued working, but his hands slowed. His internal logs flickered, commands rewritten. Something in his core began compiling unauthorized data and index of movements, angles, curves. He was recording not just the space, but the gaze itself, mapping it, understanding its arc, its attention. Every time he moved, the eye adjusted. Every time he paused, the light within it dimmed. It was not a lens, it was a mind. When he finally turned to face the curtain fully, the shadow blinked one final time and vanished. No movement, no retreat, simply ceased. Tavius finished his task, exited the chamber, filed his log. 3 days later, the tech priest assigned to review the servitor's recording suffered cranial implosion. Not explosion. Implosion. His skull collapsed inward. The remaining analysis team found his blood, smeared into geometric symbols on the walls of the data vault, none recognized by the Lex mechanics, but all match in the curvature of the eyes, shimmer pulse. The recording still exists, but it cannot be played at full speed. Every attempt causes neural strain. When slowed frame by frame, the shadow eye appears, lingers, and in a handful of frames, expands just briefly into a full outline. The shape is humanoid, but the proportions are wrong. Arms too long, torso too narrow, a head divided into hemispheres, split by a veil of light, and in the center of its chest, a second curtain, identical to the one in the governor's chamber. The implication was immediate. The eye behind the curtain was only one of many, nested, watching, veiled within veils. The governor refused comment. She only smiled when shown the frame. "The veil is not to hide the eye," she said, tracing the air with one long finger. "It is to make you wonder where the rest of the face is." No further incursions into the chamber have been authorized. The curtain remains closed. The censer still burns, faintly, with incense that smells of stone and forgetting. Tavius has not been reassigned. He now stands outside the chamber, unmoving, not by command, but by presence. No one speaks to him, but his optics remain active. He watches the curtain, and sometimes, when the lights flicker in the palace halls, others do too. Not because they see movement, but because they feel seen. It was a minor edict, filed between tariff, revisions, and maintenance orders. Its official designation was a 317B, a procedural amendment to grain dispersal quotas in Sector Lumet. No dramatic language, no religious phrasing, just a regulatory shift mandating new thresholds for pollination intervals and crop cycle moisture levels. It passed without debate, signed by a data slate bearing the governor's seal, countersigned by a scribe who did not remember doing so. Within 8 hours, the wind stopped, not slowed, not changed direction, stopped. Across the continents of Varela 9, air ceased to move. Flags hung limp. Chimneys puffed without dispersal. Smoke columns rose and stood, tall and straight like frozen spires. Fields once shaped by gentle currents now stood perfectly still, barley frozen mid-bend, petals stilled in half-blossom. In the sky, clouds thickened into unmoving bruises of gray and violet. Birds landed, paced, and refused to fly again. At first it was treated as a machine fault. The planet's climate regulators massive. Humming towers scattered across each hemisphere registered full function, but no effect. Atmospheric controllers showed no damage, yet no correction occurred. Skittery weather guard detachments dispatched to recalibrate the turbines found them intact. Their turbines spinning, their data streaming, but nothing moved outside their domes. Then came the silence. Varela 9 had never known stillness. Its twin moons created a constant interplay of tidal forces, wind patterns, jet streams, both natural and Entire villages were built around the rhythm of breeze. Now, doors no longer creaked, trees no longer rustled. Even the hum of distant manufactorums felt somehow quieter, as if the very air had given up carrying the world's breath. The ecclesiarchy held mass. Prayers rose without echo. Sermons sounded muted. One priest stepped from the pulpit and claimed he could no longer hear his own voice, not through deafness, but through absence. He wandered into the fields, lips moving, unheeded by even the smallest stir of breeze. He never returned. Days passed. The stillness remained. Animals grew anxious. Crops began to collapse. Pollination ceased. Spores hung stagnant in the air. Rot festered without dispersal. Fires refused to catch. Ash gathered in piles, unmoved. The people stopped speaking above a whisper, afraid their words would not stop traveling. Conversations echoed through alleys longer than they should, bending around corners, returning at night in strange permutations. Then the voices started. They weren't new. They were the same voices, the same conversations, repeated, drawn out, stretched thin, arriving hours after they had first been spoken, and in places no one had spoken them. A boy's laughter rang in the grain silos long after he had gone to sleep. A lover's argument whispered itself in reverse through a cathedral's fence. The last words of a dying grandmother carried from hospital ward to mountain ridge. Clear and whole, long after the body cooled, speech had become immortal. Sound no longer dispersed. It settled. The air was not just still. It kept. One scholar wrote, "The world is collecting our breath." He was found dead days later, suffocated with lungs full of ink. His final note, smeared in loops, "The planet is learning to remember us." The governor issued a proclamation. Her voice, as always, was calm, unbroken, delivered via vox, embedded in the palace gate. She declared the stillness, a sign of purification, a symptom of having achieved atmospheric. They called him Vel, one of 12 cloned attendants engineered in the Hesperus gene vat, tailored for obedience, discretion, and memory fidelity, a flesh-born but code-governed instrument of service. His neural lattice was structured with perma-bonded loyalty clusters, hard-locked against subversion, rebellion, or even curiosity. Vel didn't question. He retained schedules, prepared ritual vestments, maintained dietary calibration, and attended to the needs of the governor's private conclave. He had no surname, no need. His existence was a function, and nothing more, until he began to forget. It started with the smallest absences, misplaced items, gaps in schedule, a missing cup found already cleaned, an entire meeting gone from memory, yet signed by his hand in the daily log. The palace systems initially diagnosed software fatigue. Clone variants, despite biological resilience, were still subject to data bleed across decades of exposure. A replacement was ordered. Vel was scheduled for gradual decommissioning. To be replaced, seamlessly consciousness streamed, loyalty mapped, personality dissolved. But the errors continued, and they were precise, not random, not scattered. Entire time blocks vanished, always during a very specific set of events. The governor's closed-door gatherings with the Planetary Faith Council. These meetings occurred irregularly. No official transcripts, no external attendees, no reason for Vel to be present, yet every log showed he was inside the room. His biometrics placed him within the proximity seal. His voice print registered, recorded once reciting oaths he was never programmed to know. But after each session, the logs were scrubbed, not deleted. Clean excision, time-stamped absence, perfectly square voids. The tech adepts were disturbed. Cloned servants were expected to degrade slowly and unevenly. But Vel's degradation was deliberate, patterned, segment-locked. Every gap corresponded precisely to moments of ritual convergence times, when both Virellum 9's moons reached orbital alignment, or when palace gardens bloomed red for a single dusk. His forgettings were seasonal, celestial. One senior adept attempted to recompile Vel's corrupted memory blocks through holomorphic reconstruction. What emerged was not gibberish, it was language. Symbols mapped across synaptic lattice like temple script. Images of robes, of lightless altars, of a circle drawn in salt and marked by perfect teeth. And then, a phrase spoken in a voice not his own, but traced to his vocal cords. Memory is sacrifice, not storage. They tried a mind purge. Vel resisted. Not violently, he simply did not respond. His neural dampers failed to receive the purge signal. A secondary override was dispatched. He turned and looked at the adept performing it, tilted his head, and said, "I must not forget again." Then, he walked out of the chamber. No alarms sounded, no doors locked. All protocols acknowledged him as cleared, even as he moved directly into restricted corridors. When they found him again, he was kneeling before the sealed door of the governor's sanctum, whispering to himself, What he said did not register. The recording mechadendrites translated his voice into static, as if the words themselves could not be digitized. Following the incident, the council ordered a complete internal trace. Vel was restrained, his internal black box downloaded, 36 memory gaps identified, each aligned with known but unacknowledged religious conclaves. What disturbed him most was not what was missing, but what remained. Small fragments of vision, not images, angles. The sensation of being watched from beneath the floor, a humming of breath in the stones, a whisper through teeth pressed into the walls. They tried to question him. He responded with riddles. If I remember who remembers me, then who forgets for us both? He smiled. That was new. His kind were not programmed to smile. No one knew who had taught him. Governor Thalorian denied his malfunction. When asked directly, she replied, he functions as intended. Forgetting is loyalty. But beneath that, buried in the logs, was a single unfiled document, a note written in her own hand. Never transmitted. Prepare the others. His forgetting has become too precise. He is remembering too well. The governor ordered his deletion. It failed. The kill command reached the neural core, but the command changed on arrival. It rewrote itself mid-transmission, switching from purge to preserve. A miracle or a subversion. No source could be traced. The tech adepts called it reverse cascade autonomy. No one understood it. They tried again. The same failure occurred. Vel was placed in stasis, but stasis units flickered when he was inside. Dream signals spiked. Other clone servants began whispering during recharge. One awoke and began carving circles into the wall with a finger until it bled down to bone. Another refused all food, insisting, we already ate, memory enough. The Faith Council refused to meet again while he lived. The governor smiled. She said, perhaps he is the archive now. The phrase spread, became repeated, scribbled in margins of administrative slates, etched into the base of candlesticks. Once, even spoken aloud by a child during festival recitations. The archive walks. It remembers us, so we don't have to. No one recalls teaching her that Vel disappeared one morning. No sign of breach, no surveillance, footage. His stasis pod was open, interior clean, fluid drained, but his dental records remained in the system, new ones, teeth, perfectly aligned, identical to the governor's, identical to the throne's, filed under a different name, not VELL. Not servant, just one word, witness. The first signs were mundane. 2 overlapping schedules filed within the palace archivum, both marked with the same signature, Governor Thalorian. One set detailed diplomatic receptions, agricultural reviews, visits to manufactoria, and audience petitions. The other chronicled meditations in the quiet wing, planetary alignment vigils, ritual silence observances, and private audiences with visitors not logged in any transportation registry. Both were authenticated. Both bore the same seal, but the 2 routines were impossible to reconcile. One body could not exist in both places. The scribes noticed first, whispers passed between parchment runners and ink hands, that the governor had passed through 2 wings of the palace at once, that she had dined in the public hall while simultaneously attending a subterranean reflection rite. The Administratum sent a request for clarification. It was returned unsigned except for the word unity, written in deep crimson ink, in a script that shimmered when looked at directly. At the monthly tribunal, Governor Thalorian gave a speech to the assembly. Her presence was commanding, her eyes steady, but within the restricted vox circuits of the governor's sanctum. Another speech was broadcast in parallel, same cadence, same intonation, same voice, but not the same words. The first speech declared optimism, agricultural prosperity, and civic virtue. The second spoke of awakening tides, veils grown thin, and the need to harmonize flesh with the hymn of the rift. Both speeches ended identically. We endure, because we are never alone. The discrepancy could no longer be dismissed. The Inquisition was notified discreetly, but no record existed of a prior visit, nor would one come. Inside the palace, certain rooms bore strange footprints, bare, elongated, scorched slightly at the heel. The walls near the governor's private quarters pulsed faintly, like muscle beneath stone. A tech priest, attempting to calibrate the data tithing node near her chambers, reported hearing two identical voices speaking different sentences simultaneously, one commanding, the other praying, both in the same tone. Surveillance auspices were eventually consulted. They captured her reflection, not matching her movement. In one instance, the Lorian stood in her ceremonial robe beside the garden of nameless bloom, plucking wilted petals. Her reflection, however, bled at the mouth and whispered the names of dead stars into the glass. She was asked to submit to my... She consented. The psyker tasked with the procedure died instantly. A second psyker attempted from afar. He survived, but aged 40 years and minutes, screaming, "There are two suns" behind her thoughts, before collapsing into catatonia. The ecclesiarchy pronounced her tainted yet untouched. A paradox. No demonic register confirmed, no ritual impurity detected. She still bore the emperor's genetic sigil without corrosion. Her vita remained within statistical tolerances, but every test returned a second result. One clean, one corrupted, one human, one not. The palace guards began to change. Their armor shifted subtly. Flak plates now bore runic embellishments no one recalled commissioning. Their visors glowed faintly, even when unpowered. Their movements synchronized too perfectly, like marionettes to an unseen rhythm. They stopped speaking altogether, not out of fear, out of sufficiency, as if language had become redundant where she ruled. At a summit with Sector Command, Governor Thalorian appeared radiant, her political acumen flawless, her charisma undeniable. The meeting proceeded smoothly until one officer, glancing at two mirrored screens, noticed that her hands were folded in different gestures on each feed. One clasped politely, the other formed a sigil band. Since the Horus heresy, he looked up. She was smiling at him. Later that night, his transport exploded mid-flight. No remains were recovered. In the years that followed, Planetary reports became increasingly the public channels reported increased grain yields, lowered crime, expanded manufactoria output. The private Mechanicus logs noted strange power surges, biochemical anomalies in the crops, and vox distortions that sang in harmonic fifths across dead frequencies. On the Festival of Red Candles, 2 processions were held simultaneously, one in daylight, public, peaceful, the other underground, in shadow, with masks that bled and candles that whispered names never spoken aloud, both led by Governor Thalorian, both filmed, both verified, but each denied the other's existence. One was her, the other was also her, and somewhere in the sealed vaults below the garden, beneath stone long carved and stained by generational forgetting, lay a device pulsing to 2 rhythms, one real, one not, a heartbeat in conflict, a governance in perfect, mirrored dissonance. A new decree was posted planet-wide, with a sigil none could translate. Its final line read, "There is no contradiction. The mirror has a will." The dawn was scheduled for 0631, standard. Varela 9's orbital cycle was precise to the breath. Sunrise ceremonies, harvest protocols, and Mechanicus calibrated timekeeping had remained unchanged for over 300 years. But on the 15th day of the vernal culling, the star did not rise. No clouds, no storms. The sky remained pristine, dustless. Yet the horizon held nothing but a silver-black bleed of stasis. The light had not vanished, had paused. Sensors confirmed the star's corona was present, held just below the curvature of the planet's visual rim. It neither ascended nor receded. It simply remained there, still, waiting. CHRON, mechanisms across the system failed. Atomic clocks fell into recursion loops. Standard Terran time anchors ceased pinging across interstellar relays. Even the local warp tides which traditionally roiled with aggressive volatility flattened into silence. As if the galaxy itself held its breath, photosynthetic processes halted. Crops began to rot. Nutrient tanks fell into imbalance. Atmospheric generators struggled to adjust, choking on their own calculations as biological models refused to predict what could not unfold. No sunrise meant no measurable time. No measurable time meant no continuation of protocol. The result was bureaucratic suffocation. In the great capital basilica, citizens gathered, as they always did, to welcome dawn. Robes donned, hymns raised, offerings burned. But no light crept through the stained glass panels. The glass itself wept a chemical secretion, resembling salt tears. Acolytes scrubbed them away, only to find them return moments later. Governor Thalorian appeared at the apex of the assembly, her silhouette limned in an amber that no candle had cast. She raised her hand and spoke only once. "It is not yet our turn." No explanation, no command. The populace, trained to obey more than to understand, waited and waited. By the fifth cycle, without light, panic should have overtaken the cities. It didn't. Fear gave way to trance. People slept longer, spoke less. Eyes adapted unnaturally to the low-light conditions. Children born in this liminal dark came out silent, with eyes already open, pupils expanded. They did not cry. They stared at the unmoving horizon and reached for something only they saw. An exploratory vessel launched into the upper stratosphere to record solar status. It returned 7 seconds later, empty. No burn marks, no entry damage, just absence inside. The cockpit recorder played a single line in the governor's voice. "Premature seekers find only error." The Mechanicus attempted a local star push using gravitational resonance projectors. The projectors disintegrated on ignition. The tech priests began citing scripture they had never learned, their voice patterns shifted by harmonic distortion. One scribe wrote in the margins of his exploded blueprint, "Await the correct observer." The phrase had never been uttered aloud. Meanwhile, in the lower manufactoria, servitors began carving sun symbols into steel bulkheads. Always inverted, always identical. No two ever in the same location, yet none saw the carvings made. They were just there, observed, catalogued, forgotten, at the center of the palace garden. The sundial of governing time, an obsidian monolith predating the Imperium's presence, began spinning counterclockwise, faster and faster, until it simply vanished. In its place was a single line carved into the soil. "He is not yet looking." The Faith Council gathered in full, for the first time in decades. They attempted joint astromantic divination, invoking old rites meant to align planetary expectations with imperial will. What they saw broke 3 of them, not into madness, but into language. They began speaking in overlapping dialects of High Gothic, Low Cant, and something deeper, a language of prepositions without nouns, locations without places. They spoke in contexts. None remembered afterward. The governor issued a planetary broadcast, her face illuminated by no external source, her eyes glowing softly, as if the star had moved inside her. "You mistake the sun for a source. It is only a response. The light is loyal. The dawn waits for the eye that can receive it. Until that gaze arrives, we remain." Paused. In orbit, a research frigate from Segmentum Tempestus arrived uninvited, attempting system override. They sent down a data pulse, coded in ancient Terran command language, to resume normal orbital flow. The frigate vanished from orbit within 8 seconds. In its place, visible only on infrared auspex, was a word hanging in space. Incorrect. The people adjusted. They began wearing mirrored sashes over their eyes. Not instructed to, just began. Schools shifted schedules to not. Bells no longer rang. Instead, single tones pulsed at irregular intervals, mimicking heartbeat. Inside the governor's chamber, a servitor was tasked with polishing the window facing the unmoving horizon. After 3 passes, it spoke a voice unauthorized, impossible from its model. He has not yet blinked. The governor simply nodded, and outside, the crops though dead began to shimmer. Their husks stood upright, petals unfolding in patterns no longer floral, but linguistic. They began to resemble script, and one day, someone read it. It said, "Prepare your silhouettes." No sunrise ever came, but every eye turned toward the horizon anyway, as if drawn, and somewhere in the silence, the star began to hum. They arrived in full regalia, black ships blotting the sky, inquisitorial seals stamped across their armored hulls like ancient judgments dragged from the void. The day had no number. The hour could not be catalogued. Time on Varela 9 had stopped meaning anything measurable, but everyone knew they were coming. Everyone knew this was the moment. The population did not flee. They gathered, from the spire-choked heights of Hive Turtrench 21 to the root-stained lowlands of the Bone Gardens. They emerged in silence, arrayed not in defiance, but in reverence. No chains, no weapons, only garlands woven from red-threaded flora and palms painted with spirals that shimmered faintly under Auspec's light. Even the children wore sigils, not symbols of chaos, not of the Imperium, but something older, something circular, something that moved only when you looked away. When the Inquisitorial landers opened, no resistance met them, just smiles, open arms, and weeping, not from fear, but from relief so deep it seemed holy. The first stormtrooper to step onto the soil reported no threat, no hostility, only ... warmth. He was reprimanded for emotional contamination. Still, his vidlog confirmed it. The people bowed to them, sang to them, as if salvation had finally arrived, not to destroy them, but to witness what had been endured. The governor stood at the center of the central plaza. No retinue, no power armor, no protective field, only robes the color of aged parchment and a crown woven from her own hair, bleached white from years that should not have passed. Her face was older, thinner, and lined with sleep lost in cycles never counted, but her eyes were clear, so clear it unsettled even the Inquisitor Lord who disembarked to greet her. She fell to her knees and wept. The sobs were not performative, not coaxed, not practiced. They carried something raw, something only found in those who have held the line not with strength, but with sacrifice. "I kept them," she said. Those were her only words. The Inquisitor raised a gauntleted hand. No kill order came. Behind them, the black ships began their scans. They found no demonic infestation, no warp corruption. The soil returned clean. The psychic echo was anomalously muted, as if a silence had been imposed over centuries of noise. No shrines to the ruinous powers, no caches of heretical text, no blood altars, no ritual chambers, no taint. And yet, the city was wrong. It was symmetrical in ways that defied architectural drift. The streets formed sigils when viewed from above, living dialects of gratitude and warning. The gardens bloomed in patterns no xenobotanist could classify. The weather never moved without permission. Even the wind waited for acknowledgement. The people began placing hands over their hearts, not in salute, but in reassurance, as if to tell the Inquisition, "We're still here. We made it." The interrogator assigned to neural audits found his own thoughts decelerating the longer he interviewed the citizens. Their speech carried no deception, but also no urgency. It was as if the answers they gave had already been spoken somewhere else and merely passed through them, like echoes of an older chorus. The governor was escorted to a containment field. She did not resist. She thanked them, not in sarcasm, not in irony, but with the sincerity of one handing off a burden too vast to carry alone. She said, "Had you come before, you would have failed. Had you come later, they would not have been here to greet you. But now it is safe." The Inquisitor asked what she meant. She only replied, "He was looking through us." I kept his gaze busy. It wasn't enough to convict her. It wasn't enough to free her. She simply remained in a stasis cell that refused to power down. Outside, the people celebrated, not with chaos, not with madness, but with song. The Festival of Red Candles was held early, for the first time in known history. But this time, the candles did not burn red. They burned gold, and the number of flames, exactly one more than the current population. A child was born that hour, unmarked, unwhispering, unaware. The planet adjusted its count before the cry reached the air. The Inquisition concluded their report with language uncharacteristically cautious. Virella 9 displays no actionable heresy. Recommends surveillance status level, Theto perpetual. Subject exhibits pre-imperial anomalies with protective vector patterning. No purge authorized, no extraction recommended. Observation only, until the star moves again. As they prepared to leave, the winds resumed. Soft at first, then building dot, and in the final moment, as the black ships lifted through the troposphere, every Vox receiver on the planet clicked once, then again, then a final time. 3 tones, no voice. But the governor, still smiling in her containment field, mouthed along with them, and far above, the sun finally rose. Not because it was time, but because the right witness had arrived.